today we're going to be talking about the cell cycle. So you will need your note packet out today. I'll let you get that out for a second. So the cell cycle. In 7th grade, you learned about cell division and mitosis, and we're going to be talking about that today. But mitosis is just one little piece in what the cell does on any given day. If you have your note packet out, you can grab a highlighter. We're going to go ahead and we are going to highlight 1.3. I can explain how proteins regulate the cell cycle. So that's going to be our goal today. Eventually, we're going to get to mitosis. We'll talk a little bit about that today, how the cell divides. But today, we're going to talk about the big overview. What is the cell doing when it is dividing, when it isn't dividing? And then we'll talk about all of the rest of this stuff after that on Monday. All right, so my question to you is, where do new cells come from? Where do they come from? We know from cell theory, the smallest thing that can be living is a cell. All living things are made up of cells. And that third part, new cells come from pre-existing cells. So if we take a look, if we were scientists and we were looking under the microscope, this is a much higher power microscope than they had back in the 17 and 1800s when they were figuring this stuff out. But they could still see some stuff happening in these cells. They didn't have this powerful of a microscope, but they could still see chromosomes, and they saw them in different phases or in different areas in different types of cells, and they wondered about why. So these little squiggly guys, these are chromosomes. We're going to watch what happens here in a second. Oh, notice they were all kind of in the middle, and now they're going to each side. So when scientists were looking under the microscope, they saw different cells. Some of them looked like this. Some of the cells had chromosomes that looked like this, that were further apart. And they realized that there must be more going on and that these cells actually must be in different phases of dividing. So underneath, where do new cells come from? You're going to go ahead and write down all cells come from pre-existing cells. They come from cells that are already existing. Cells divide to create new cells. And then how do we know? What's our evidence? Well, our evidence is because scientists saw cells dividing under the microscope. And again, this took a long time. This wasn't something that happened. I mean, people were pretty smart. So we're talking back in the 1800s when they 1700s, 1600s, when they developed the microscope, and then they were looking at things and those microscopes got more and more powerful and they were able to see chromosomes and stuff inside of those cells. So here's the deal. We know that cells divide. They make new cells. What the heck else does a cell do during its lifetime? That's what we're going to look at today. So we're going to compare what a cell does during its lifetime to what you do. We're going to look at one day for you. Okay, so you've got this little chart that you can fill in on that front page, and I'll show you how this works. So this is just one day. You see all the hours. You're going to fill it in. This is what like my day looks like. So first, I'm sleeping from like 9:30, 10 to, 6 a.m. Then I get ready. I go to work. I come home. I do a workout. I eat dinner. I watch TV and I read. So what I'm going to have you do right now is take a couple minutes and I want you to go ahead and fill out your little chart. Okay. So go ahead, fill out that chart. You can use different colors if you want. And I'm going to ask that we pause this video while you do that. So we're going to pause it. And then once you're done, we can hit play again. So now that you've filled out your schedule, yours might look a little different from somebody else's, but I'm guessing you all sleep, you all eat, you're all going to school, you all do similar things. Well, cells are like that. Cells do similar things, but some cells, because they have different jobs, they do different things. So or maybe they spend more time sleeping or less time doing their job. So just like you and your schoolmates, cells are similar, but they're also different. All right, so you already filled in yours. So now we're going to talk about how this compares to a cell. So on your notes packet, I believe this is on the next page, you are going to fill in, you've got a circle. The cell circle looks a little simpler than yours. So you're going to fill this in. There's a little chunk that's called mitosis. If you remember that from 7th grade, that's when the cell's dividing. Then there's this whole other chunk called interphase. And we got to talk about what the heck is happening when the cell's not dividing. You'll notice I also have arrows going around. That's because this repeats. Just like your day repeats, like you go to sleep, you wake up again, you do a whole nother day. Okay? You keep going around and around until you die. Same thing that the cell does. So we call this the cell cycle because it goes around and we keep doing the same thing just like you do every day. And we're going to write this definition. Okay, what is the cell cycle? A cycle of mitosis and interphase. We're going to talk about what those mean in a minute. And the cell repeats over and over. Your cycle would be a cycle of sleep, eat, and work, or school that you repeat over and over. Now, if we take a look, this diagram over here is a little more complicated than the one we drew. Okay, so we're going to talk about this, but notice all of this orange part is interphase. There's some different stuff that happens there. And then mitosis is over here. And maybe you recognize those words from 7th grade: telophase, anaphase, metaphase, prophase. Okay, this is when our cell's dividing. Again, we'll talk about this. So let's take a look. This is another example. I'm going to show you here. This is another example of what we just drew. The M is for mitosis. That's when our cell's going to be dividing. Again, we'll talk about this. The whole other part is called interphase. So let's take a look at what the cell's doing during interphase when it's not dividing. Ooh, it's checking to make sure chromosomes are attached. It's checking to make sure it's big enough. It has nutrients. There's no DNA damage. Our DNA is copied. It's okay if this doesn't mean a lot to you right now, but we're checking a bunch of things, okay? And there's a couple different phases in here. So these little checkpoints, these are important. It's kind of like your mom saying, hey, did you remember to bring your lunch to school? Don't forget your lunch. Your mom is checking to make sure you're all ready to go to school. The cell has these checkpoints too to make sure it's ready to go on to the next point. So we're going to write that down. There are checkpoints along the cell cycle to make sure the cell is ready to divide. So when the cell's not dividing, it's checking to make sure, hey, are we getting ready to divide here? So along this whole cycle, checkpoints make sure the cell is doing everything properly. If the cell doesn't have all of this stuff prepared for that checkpoint, like maybe your mom's like, hey, did you make your lunch? And you don't have your lunch, you got to go back and make your lunch before you can leave. Same thing with the cell. If the cell's not ready, it's got to go back and fix that stuff before it can go on to the next part of the cell cycle. All right, so I'm going to have you flip now. There's a chart here. So we said that the cell cycle has two parts. It has mitosis when it's dividing and interphase when it's not dividing. We're going to write down what happens when the cell is not dividing. So we're going to fill in interphase here. So we're going to put interphase right here. You can draw it sideways, turn your paper sideways and write it in there. We have 5 bullet points, I think, to write here. So write small. This is the only one that we've got a whole bunch of bullet points for. So we're going to write down what happens. Okay. So notice interphase is a big chunk of the time. Okay. And you can see a couple things that happen. It says organelles double, DNA replication, growth. Okay. So if we had to guess what percentage out of 100% this orange part would account for, what would you guess? Maybe like 80%? It's actually like 80 to 90%. So most of the time the cell's not dividing. It's doing other stuff. We got to figure out what that other stuff is. So we're going to write down what the cell's doing when it's not dividing. Here's a picture of what the cell looks like when it's not dividing, and we're going to talk about it. So here are our bullet points. There's going to be 5. So first important thing is the cell's not dividing. So in interphase, when it's not in mitosis, when it's doing all of its other stuff, it's not dividing. The only time it's dividing is in mitosis. So cell is not dividing. So what is it doing if it's not dividing? Well, it's got to do some stuff so it can get ready to divide. It's got to copy its DNA. Oh, if we have to make 2 cells, we need 2 copies of DNA. It's got to grow. It's got to get bigger. And copy or duplicate its organelles. Ooh, remember like ribosome, Golgi body, endoplasmic reticulum? It's got to copy all those because if we want to split our cell in half, we want to have each half of that cell, each new cell have enough organelles. The nucleus, all that stuff has to get copied. So basically what the cell's doing here is it's getting ready to divide. It's not dividing, but it's getting ready. All right. The cell does its normal job. If it's a muscle cell, it's going to be contracting. If it's a blood cell, it's carrying oxygen. If it's an eye cell, it's picking up light. And if it's a nerve cell, it's sending signals to your brain. It's doing its normal job. Now, notice in this picture here, our DNA. Remember in the beginning of the first unit when I said it looks like X's? In this unit, we're going to learn that DNA doesn't always look like X's. In fact, it very rarely looks like X's. It looks like spaghetti here. We have a name for DNA when it looks like little strings and spaghetti. We say it's chromatin. It's not wound up in nice, neat little X chromosomes. It's in long little strings. What I like to think of is that the chromatin, if you take a ball of yarn and you unwind it all and you put it in a pile, that's what chromatin looks like. It's just a messy bunch of yarn. If I wind that yarn up all nice and neat in a ball or in a skein, then it's like a chromosome. Chromosomes are just DNA that's all nicely wound up. And we can see the nucleus. That's important because sometimes we can't see the nucleus. When the cell's in different other phases, we're not going to be able to see that. So it's important that we write that there is a nucleus visible. We can see the nuclear membrane. So the part around the nucleus is called the nuclear membrane. So this is interphase. I'm going to flip back in a second here. So in interphase, this part, this big orange part, this is all the stuff it's doing. And this makes sense now. Growth. Yeah, it's got to grow so it can divide. Organelles double. Yeah, they got to copy themselves. DNA gets copied so that our two new cells each have a set of DNA. We grow again. So this whole part here is getting ready to divide, and the cell is doing its job. Now we got to talk about this mitosis part. Okay, and mitosis you probably know from 7th grade. So flip back to the previous page now. On that previous page, we've got a definition for mitosis. What is mitosis? Well, mitosis is the process by which body cells divide to produce new cells. So you can see a cell dividing here. And the key here is we're using the word body cells. You might think, oh, Ms. Frankson, that means every cell in my body. Yes, except reproductive cells. We call those reproductive or sex cells. So mitosis, we don't use to make reproductive cells, so like sperm and egg cells. There's fancier terms. Body cells are called somatic cells, and sex cells or reproductive cells are called gametes. I'm just going to use the word body cells for simplicity's sake, and just know this means all the cells in our body except the reproductive cells. So here is where our cell divides to make new cells. We are going to write down this to help us remember that it only happens in body cells. What are some examples? Stomach, liver, kidney. Not sex or reproductive cells. So can you think of another example of a body cell besides a stomach, liver, or kidney? Maybe you said blood cell, brain cell, muscle cell, eye cell. Those would all be examples. Heart cell. All right, moving on here. So one thing I want us to take a look at is this graph. This says gestational age. That means age of a baby before it's born. So a baby is born usually about 40 weeks. So this is before the baby's born. And look, we've got total cell number in billions. What happens to the number of cells in that baby when it's in the mother's stomach or in the mother's womb? Well, that number of cells increases by billions and billions and billions. Where do those new cells come from? Those new cells are coming from cell division, from mitosis. So why do we need mitosis? Why do we need to create new cells? That's what we're going to look at next. So the purpose of mitosis, two purposes. One, to grow like a little baby inside of a mother's womb. Even when that baby's born, it's going to continue to grow. You're probably still continuing to grow. So growth, in order for us to get taller or longer, we need to have more cells. One common thing people think, sometimes they think our cells just get bigger. Remember we said our cells can't get bigger. They can't move nutrients fast when they get too big. So instead, they split in half and create more cells. The other thing we need them for is to repair and replace old or damaged cells. When you fall down and you get a scrape, what happens? You bleed for a little bit. Then you get a scab. But eventually that scab falls off and you have new skin underneath. Well, where do those new skin cells come from? Well, they came from your other skin cells in the area dividing to produce new ones. When you take a sip of hot chocolate and it burns your mouth because it's too hot, or pizza. Oh, pizza's the worst, right? It burns your mouth. Your mouth and tongue don't stay burned forever because your body makes new cells to replace them. So to repair and replace old or damaged cells. So what I would like you to do, you can draw this little drawing next to your definition of mitosis here. So we've got a circle. This is our starting cell. Human cells have 46 chromosomes. They start with 46. So we're going to have a 46 inside of there to represent the 46 chromosomes that you have. You get 23 from your mom and 23 from your dad. Now remember, before we can divide, our DNA gets copied. So if we copy all these chromosomes and we had 46 to start with, how many are we going to have after we copy them? We're going to have 92. So you can draw another cell. We copied our chromosomes. We also copied our organelles, our ribosomes. So now we've got 92 chromosomes. So what's going to happen next? Well, the cell's going to split into two. So this cell's literally going to pinch in half and split in two. And it's going to have half of the stuff go to one side, half of the stuff go to the other. So the cytoplasm, half of that, half of the nucleus and the Golgi bodies and the ribosomes are going to go to one, the other half to the other. So then if these 92 chromosomes are split in half, how many is each cell going to get? Each cell is going to end up with 46 chromosomes. Hey, that's the same as what we started with, which is good. If I'm making a copy of a skin cell because I need to replace some skin cells, it would make sense that I would want them to be the same as the one I was copying. So one of the things I want you to write is that it makes two identical cells. Okay? The cells it makes are identical to each other. They're also identical to the parent cell. And I'm saying 46 chromosomes, that's in humans. Okay. If it's a different organism, it's going to have a different number. So if I start with 23 chromosomes, we're going to end up with 23 in each cell here. So we always make the exact same cells. If I want to replace a skin cell, we're going to make the same exact skin cells that we started with. They're not going to have more chromosomes or less chromosomes than before. All right, the last thing we're going to write are the stages. And this isn't going to, maybe you remember this, but this isn't going to make a lot of sense now. But we're going to write the stages and we're going to abbreviate them. We're only going to use the first letter. So PMATC, you just have to write this. P stands for prophase, M for metaphase, A for anaphase, T for telophase, and C for cytokinesis. You don't need to know those words yet. They're going to be on your next page, so you don't need to worry about writing all those full words. We're just going to write PMATC. It's an easy way to remember the order of the stages. So to recap, okay, we have interphase. I'm going to go back to a different slide here. We have interphase. Interphase is when we're copying stuff, we're getting ready to divide, we're growing, we're doing our job. And we have mitosis. Mitosis is when we're going to split our cells in half. We're going to divide them. We haven't talked about all the little details that happen in mitosis yet, but we know that our big thing that our cells do, similar to how we do stuff every day, they do a period where they're doing their job and they're getting ready to divide. And then they have a period called mitosis where they are dividing. So here's what I would like you to do. We already filled out interphase here, okay? We're going to fill in the names of these, the names of these stages next week. But before we do that, what I would like you to do with your table mates, the people around you at your desk. Okay. I want you to see what you can come up with that's going on in each of these cells. Okay. So let's do one together. Okay. Let's do this first one. Notice I see something labeled chromosomes here, and I don't see any of the squiggly DNA. I'm going to write down something like, I can see chromosomes, or chromosomes can be seen. That was different from this picture. Here we had that chromatin. So I'm going to write down chromosomes can be seen. Okay. I see spindle fibers. Oh, look, it looks like the spindle fibers connect to the chromosomes. So I could write down spindle fibers connect to chromosomes. Can I see the nucleus anymore? Or the nuclear membrane? Oh no, I don't. Can't see the nuclear membrane. So what I want you to do is compare it to the previous picture and write down what are the differences? What are the things you can see or the things you can't see? And I need you to do that for every picture here. Okay? Don't be afraid about being wrong. We're going to go over it on Monday. I need you to write down, what do you see happening? Okay? So where are the chromosomes in the cell? Do you see the nucleus? Are there chromosomes or chromatin? Okay, so I need you to write down at least one bullet point for each of these pictures. If you can get more than one, great.